Greetings to you all, fellow travelers. This is Grotnip, welcoming you all back to the logbook of a simple Lindworm traveler. Last week's episode gave me the idea to take a look at some of the profiles I would like to have changed in Warcrow going forward when the eventual balance pass comes along, so I thought this might be as good a week as any to jump into the subject matter, so here we go. Before advancing any further, let's discuss the balance of Warcrow for a moment, however. I am not the most experienced wargamer out there, but I have done a ton of wargaming during my miniature hobby career, and I would say that I have quite some experience from balances and imbalances in the various game systems. When comparing what I see in Warcrow as of right now to the things that I have seen in other games before, I have to say that I am really amazed by how well balanced a game Warcrow is as of right now, and how almost all the units, all the characters are compelling choices, at least under certain circumstances. So I really appreciate that. Obviously, this is something of an advantage that you get when you have a clean slate design, such as Warcrow, where you get to start from nothing and you don't have to carry the weight of the past choices with you, something that seems to weigh on Infinity, in my opinion, for example. When it comes to evaluating the balance between the power level of different units, we also do need to remember, I think, that the power level or the desirability of a unit or a character is in a constant flux. It's a dynamic process where the shifting meta, what is considered to be playable, what is considered to be viable, what is considered to be good for the current game environment changes from time to time, and rules updates and potential profile updates will also shake up the landscape of the Warcrow gaming community. So what is desirable and what is not will eventually change and shift. Even though I am building this castle of mine on sand, and it's probably not going to look all that great in a few months' time, when we eventually get some balance updates. I don't know when this will be, don't quote on me on this, but anyhow, I still wanted to take a look at some of the profiles that I think could use a little bit of a change in my mind. As previously, these are my extremely subjective takes, so don't take them too seriously, take them more as a bit of fun. I'm going to be presenting 3 profiles I would like to have changed from all the factions except Feudum. I don't have enough experience playing against or watching Feudum play to have any solid opinions on their units, nor do I currently think that any of them warrant any major changes. I'm going to present my perceived problems with every unit I'm covering, and then you can, if you feel like it, stop the video, try to come up with a way you would change the unit in order to make it better for the entire game's balance, and then come up with what I came up with, and we can have this discussion of sorts, even though we are not actually in the same place and in the same time. If that sounds good to you, let's proceed to the units I would like to have changed. Let's start with my beloved northern tribes. As you can see, I've scoured the Corvus Belli materials online for some art pictures to make this presentation a bit more lively. I haven't photographed anything of mine for a while now, and I don't want to keep reusing the same pictures and over again, so something a bit different this time around. The first and pretty obvious problem child of the northern tribes, I feel, is the skin changers that have been out since the release of the Beyond Winds from the North. I really love the feel factor of this unit. It's such a cool unit, and I really like how you get this two-in-one deal with regards to this unit due to your ability to customize the unit's capabilities to some extent via their totem ability. The skin changers are a shock infantry, line breaker infantry type unit. So they are supposed to be able to hit extremely hard. And while they do have a sky high damage potential, thanks to the fact that due to their hollow special switch, they can actually inflict double damage on their orange dice, not only on their single red dice. But unfortunately, the unit's average damage is actually rather mundane. It's a bit north of 4 points on average, and that's not something that you get a specialized unit to do in northern tribes usually. And at the same time, the skin changers are exceedingly terrible at defending themselves and at capturing objectives due to their natural conquest value of 0. So the fact that the unit doesn't hit harder or do even more cool stuff is unfortunately a tad unforgivable in the competitive sense. Yes, there are some extremely niche cases where the skin changers can work. Lotta attached to them in a War Alliance context is probably the most famous example. There are others, but at the same time, I do feel that the skin changers could do with a little bit of help without breaking the balance of the game entirely. So, how would I go about improving the skin changers then? I would be eager to lean more heavily on the totem ability, and I would tie the improvements that I would make to the skin changers to the totem selected. I would grant the totem ability the capability of adding both an offensive and a defensive switch on the skin changers unit, choosing either polar bear or arctic fox. I feel that in the current Warcrow environment, the polar bear totem is by far the weaker one. It leaves the unit slower while granting only 2 additional wounds between the 2 members. Well, more if you attach a character, but that's maybe not the main point here. And also you forego using the excellent scout ability provided by the Arctic Fox totem. So hence I would give the unit as a whole more offensive power, but this offensive power would be more heavily weighed towards the polar bear totem. What I would do is that I would give both forms a hollow success switch ability. For the Arctic Fox, it would be enough in my mind for this ability to just remove blocks from the enemy. This would bring up the average damage value of the skin changers, not tremendously, but a little bit. And it would also not increase the ceiling of the Arctic Fox skin changers at all. Then I would go more heavily when it comes to increasing the damage output of the polar bear totem skin changers, because I would allow them to switch hollow successes for double successes. These would be a nice boost to their damage output. It would make the unit a lot more dangerous, but at the same time, since there are no automatic wounds added beyond what they are already doing, high block enemies could still shrug off most of the damage that the polar bear skin changers would be throwing their way. Given that the double black and a blue or double black that the skin changers are rolling on defense is such a piss poor defense roll for such an expensive unit, I would also give some help in this regard. I would give both totem animals a double special switch that would, for the Arctic Fox, allow the skin changers to defend more nimbly, more effectively by removing a block from the attacker's roll, while on the defense the polar bear skin changers would be hitting back even harder, exchanging double specials for successes. With the makeup of the dice that the skin changers are rolling, they would on average only be triggering this defensive switch once per roll, and getting two switches, two double special switches that is off, would be exceedingly rare. So I don't think this would break the unit either, but it would make them more enticing an option. And I think it would lean more heavily to their bestial and aggressive nature, while at the same time giving Northern Tribes players more worth for the points that they are paying. The second Northern Tribes unit I would like to see changed a bit is also a Varank unit, this time the Ice Archers. I really like the basic concept of the Ice Archers. I like that they are a cheap ranged infantry unit. There are ways to buff them to high heavens, namely Celica in faction, but at the same time, while they are capable of some crowd control effects and even firing over the heads of allied units, they still feel somewhat lackluster when not accompanied by Celica. While throwing out slowed on enemies, even several units of enemies, is quite nice. That's usually pretty much the only thing Ice Archers not accompanied by their marksman leader are capable of doing, and that leaves them without a purpose in most companies, unless you are choosing to go big and attach Celica to the unit. The Northern Tribes don't have a plethora of cheap units to access, really. When it comes to non-character units, you have availability 3 orc hunters, then you have your Ice Archers at 25 points, and then you go to 30 after that. But the fact that the Ice Archers really aren't a 25-point unit, they tend to be a 55-point unit, because you pretty much have to attach Celica to get enough value out of them, means that this unit does not act as a cheap and cheerful filler for your company as I originally envisioned them doing. What little help could be then given to the Ice Archers in order to make them more playable even without Celica? My change would be rather straightforward and not that big, I think. I would slightly increase the quote-unquote first shot damage of the Ice Archers by allowing them to trigger their own blue arrows passive on the first volley that they fire. As things work right now, the blue arrows that inflict an automatic wound against slowed enemies triggers when the Ice Archers declare their ranged attack. So the enemy already has to be slowed when the shot is taken for the blue arrows to trigger, which means that you either have to get the enemy to cross rugged terrain in order to gain slowed, you have to crowd control them in some other way, or in the most common scenario, the unit has shot the enemy already once thanks to Celica, and then they get to fire a second time, and on the second time they will be able to trigger blue arrows since they slowed the enemy the first time around. But what I would like to see is to simply make the blue arrows so that they trigger during the switches step of the roll, and this would mean that the ice archers would be able to shoot an enemy, trigger their switch ability that slows the said enemy, and then inflict that one automatic wound against the enemy unit. This would not make the ice archers a threatening unit to most enemies anyway, but it would add some cheap damage to what the archers are capable of doing, and importantly it would allow them to hit that one wound even against high defense targets pretty consistently, as long as the enemy is capable of being slowed. So I feel that would breathe life into using ice archers even as a solo unit from time to time. And also in the Celica context, that would only increase the ice archers effective damage output by a single point on the first shot, since on the second shot the blue arrows would be triggering anyway. Next up, one of my big time disgruntlements when it comes to the northern tribes, the Warg Riders. As I stated in the video regarding this unit, wolf riding troops are my favorite fantasy trope out of them all, and I really like the look and in many regards the design of the Warg Riders in Warcrow. But it has to be said that the Black Angels kick the Warg Riders down the field every day of the week, while at the same time also being a cheaper cavalry unit. And while I can live with the fact that okay, my faction may not be the cavalry faction out there, I would still like to see some improvement for the Warg Riders. The Warg Riders are an interesting unit in that they are terrifyingly fast, rugged, ignoring 18 stride charge range is the highest in the entire game as of right now. They do hit pretty hard, not amazingly hard, but pretty hard for a unit of their cost. And they have an excellent defense roll and a really cool defensive switch. But at the same time, the unit is held back by the fact that the attachable characters are so damn expensive and there are so few to choose from. The unit is held back also by its low willpower and also its low morale. And the latter one is especially damning because if you want to access the spectral nature of the Warg mounts to pass through the enemy unit and engage something behind them, the morale one simply does not facilitate this fact, because when you activate your Warg Riders, you get your activation token, the enemy proceeds to hit you and you trigger your switch. Okay, now you could potentially teleport through the enemy unit, but at the same time you're full on stress, so you can't do anything once you get there. So to everybody's surprise, the one change I would make for the Warg Riders would be that the unit would be granted an extra point of morale. This would give a bare bones riding solo unit of Warg Riders more play, especially once the battle is joined and the fighting continues. The Warg Riders are not a shock cavalry unit, they are the definition of a melee cavalry unit to me. They want to get stuck with the enemy by charging, yes, but afterwards they keep fighting out the melee for as long as it takes, supported by their Warg's ability as well as their Bloodlust keyword. And Morale 2 would greatly, I feel, facilitate the ability to do this exact thing. Getting that second point of morale would also be really helpful for the expensive characters that you are attaching to your Warg Riders, because what I have seen happen time and time again is that Northern Tribes players play their Warg Riders with Escort or with the Mounted Wrathmane, who's an awesome model who I really love in and of themselves, and then they have to move once to get into a position, then they take a point of stress to charge and hit something rather devastatingly, hopefully, but then enemy claps back and now the unit is full on stress, stranded next to the enemies and taking hit after hit as a result after. The Warg Riders with characters are also too easy to stress lock by for example, the dastardly Science of Yaldabaoth, I feel, and since the unit isn't even fearless, anything with intimidating becomes a problem in this regard also. So a bump in morale would not only help the solo Warg Riders, it would also allow Northern Tribes players who choose to go the extra distance and buy that character for the unit, effectively doubling the unit's cost, to play with their toy one extra activation per round. I don't think that's too much to ask. Now do you? For most factions, I had to make some choices on what to include in my category of 3. So in some cases, I have chosen to prepare a honorable mention of something that I would like to see changed, a pseudo 4th profile. And in the case of the Northern Tribes, no, it's not going to be Alvard. I have well and truly beat that dead horse enough already. It's going to be the Evoker. I really appreciate how the introduction of the Rock Troll has seen the Evoker's stocks rise, but take a look at the Evoker's wounds attribute and their defense roll. What on earth is this? It's so damn hard to keep your Evoker alive. I get it, flimsy spellcaster and all that, but good grief, take a look around what other factions have access to. 2 wounds, yeah, sure, let's say that's necessary, but really, a black dice on defense? Come on, that's a bad joke, right? Also, taking tinge effects that can cause wounds on a 2-wound model is pretty devastating, so really the Evoker could use some help here. I don't think that adding an automatic block to that defense roll would be a bridge too far in any way. Next up, let's take a look at the hegemony of Emberspeak and the profiles I would like to see changed there. Firstly, my absolute favorite unit of several models in hegemony, the Bulwarks. I feel that when the Bulwarks were released, they very much did their thing. They were an immovable force of human will and armor at the middle of the board that the enemy usually could not find a way to shift. And the hegemony players with their more limited options were willing to pay the hefty price for the services of these soldiers, knowing that they would not have to wonder whether the center objective was being held or not, and the rest of the force was able to maneuver around the bulwarks. Unfortunately, the world has changed quite a lot from those days around the bulwarks, while these heavily armored spear men have stayed the same. Firstly, the hegemony players have access to so many more options these days that it's hard to fit everything in a list, and it would seem that bulwarks are quite often the thing to go when there are not enough points for your Warwick, your Arquebusiers, your Aggressors, your Black Angels, and what have you, not to mention the plethora of excellent characters to attach to these units. Also, a really big change and a necessary change for large models, yes, but a huge nerf on the bulwarks was the fact that in the latest update it was made so that large models can ignore the immovable attribute keyword of smaller models, which means that the bulwarks can no longer take up positions on an objective and secure it via their enormous pool of wounds, their excellent defense roll, and immovable, because now if an enemy large model comes along, they can use push abilities, shove abilities and such to try and throw the bulwarks away from the objective, thus mitigating the value that the hegemony player would be gaining from their expensive defensive unit. So I do feel that the bulwarks do need some help in order to make them a compelling choice again going forward. How to make bulwarks more loved then? My solution would be to touch absolutely nothing except taunt the enemy special ability. As it's worded right now, I don't think taunt the enemy is all that um, great a ability. Yes, you can draw enemy units out of line, and yes, you can hurt certain types of units, especially large and cavalry, when you force them to engage your bulwarks, but at the same time you are allowing an enemy unit to charge during your activation. They don't get an activation token or stress from that, and even though the bulwarks can taunt something to charge the unit, and then the bulwarks can hit back, their offensive roll is so anemic that this usually does not end up mattering all that much. All this to say, all this even before we remember the fact that the enemy can indeed resist taunt the enemy. It is not a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. So not only do you have to weigh in the opportunity cost of activating the bulwarks to taunt the enemy, but you also have to factor in that the enemy might just pass their test and not suffer the effects anyway. So for this reason and for the reasons already previously stated, I would change taunt the enemy so that it would be a constantly active passive ability, or potentially a command skill, but I'm leaning more towards the passive ability myself, that would force all enemy units capable of charging, assaulting, or performing a ranged attack against the bulwarks to target the bulwarks instead of another hegemony unit they're trying to engage, unless they pass the willpower test that is baked into how taunt the enemy works as of right now. This would mean that a centrally positioned unit of bulwarks would be something of an anchor for, or could be something of an anchor for the rest of the force, and enemies would have to play around the fact that if they are looking to charge or shoot, for example, the more weakish, more easy to hurt units around the bulwarks, their warriors might not actually heed the order, and instead they might waste their attacks on the bulwarks themselves. And this is an ability that I would be willing to pay all these points for in some of my hegemony lists. So I hope that this would make the bulwarks more compelling an option going forward. At the same time, you would not have to increase the offensive output of the bulwarks at all. They could still wield the rubber spears that they obviously do and focus on being the punching bags of the enemy, as the great military minds of the hegemony have so clearly intended. The second unit I would like to see changed in the hegemony is actually a combination of two units, but I think this is more than legitimate when we are talking about the Elven twins. I absolutely love the idea of the elves in Lindworm being born as twins, and with the Astari training one of the siblings to be a wizard and the other to be a bodyguard of sorts for their sibling. There is a way that Corvus Belli has tried to bake in this into how these units work on the battlefield, but unfortunately as of right now the Frostfire Herald and or the Gale Falchion don't feel like compelling enough choices for the hegemony players to field. Luckily for us adventurous Warcrow players, there already exists an ability on both the Frostfire Herald and the Gale Falchion that we could remake in order to breathe some life into these underutilized models. I would remake their signature Twins Bond into a passive ability that would allow you to basically activate both of the Elven Twins at the same time. This could, for example, take the form of if one of the elves activates within 10 strides of the other one could subsequently activate to execute exactly the same set of abilities or skills as their brother slash sister just did. To facilitate this, I would also probably have to change Gale Falchion's Leaf on the Wind ability to be a short action spell instead of a long action spell, and this would necessitate reducing the place distance a bit, but I don't think that would be such a big problem. I could even go as far as to grant the Frostfire Herald and the Gale Falchion extra movement during the no one gets left behind step if both of them are able to perform this movement, but I don't think that's the main point in what I would change. All in all, I feel that if you could activate these two elves at once, they would stop being two quite high opportunity cost characters, and they would function more as a unit of two basically. This would also increase the famous activation efficiency of the hegemony of Embersic. I have heard some laments coming from hegemony players that other factions are getting way more activations than they are at the moment. So this would be a way of helping out in that regard also. At the same time, as this would be a combination of two different models, the enemy could disrupt this activation effectiveness by taking out one or the other of the elves. So I think that would also be extremely background centric. If you lose one, then you lose the bond between them for good. So that's something that I would look into going forward. Speaking of elven spellcasters that have it rough, oof, Marhail the Refused. As is the theme with many of the choices here, Marhail is such a cool model. Launching himself onto the air, the miniature, brandishing his summoned psychic blade, and being the terrifying boogeyman who can invade the minds of friends and foes alike in the backstory. That's all really great stuff. Unfortunately, Marhail has been reduced to the universal proxy model for the aid because Marhail costs more. The aid packs the all-important mental coordination ability, unlike the named version of the character. And while Marhail's spectral sword is cool, it's not really worth it. Most of the time, it's way too unreliable, and even if you manage to trigger everything that you're looking to do with it, it's still not going to be worth the investment most of the time, unfortunately. His signature ability in Steal the Essence is also a bit hard to make good use of, or rather quite hard to make good use of, so you end up paying a lot of points for a model that's activation hungry to use and not all that consistent at providing value. How would I then remake Marhail in order to justify his expensive cost of 35 points? Well, I'd go as far as to remake both of his signature abilities. If we start with Steal the Essence, I would probably turn that one into a command ability, not unlike Morgaine's Blessed Brooch in Feudum. In addition to stripping an enemy unit of a skill, passive skill, command skill, yada yada yada, I would also bake in the extra activation provided by the mental coordination. This would make Marhail more a tuned up version of the aid rather than a worse version of the aid that he is unfortunately as of right now in my mind. I would also remake the Spectral Sword of Marhail, because at the moment it feels like there are so much more powerful abilities of this kind, and Marhail's his combat ability just pales in comparison. If you look at the model, that's supposed to be a sword that hurts, and it's supposed to be something truly magical, so to speak. And the fact that the Spectral Sword is the only way that Marhail can actually attack enemies also means, for example, that he's incapable of doing opportunity attacks and such. So I think buffing this ability would make a lot of sense. I would approach buffing the Spectral Sword of Marhail in two ways. Firstly, I would increase the range quite a lot. The Hegemony has a distinct lack of things that can strike really far, the Black Angels being the main culprit that can do that. And while yes, that can be some of their faction identity, if someone is paying 35 points to fling a melee spellcaster at me, I want them to be able to make good use of that spellcaster. So I would love to see Marhail's sword's range increase to 20 strides. You are performing a full action spell with this one in any case, so you don't get to move and cast this, so you might as well get more range out of it. I would also replace the unwieldy and difficult to make reliable use of ability of this spell to double the damage via a tinge token taken, and instead replace this ability with the chance to add 2 automatic successes to the roll. Triple orange is especially unreliable a attack roll to make. Yes, you could roll all 3 successes and that would be happy times for everyone, but you do have to remember that since Marhail lacks the elite keyword, you are only rolling a success and only a single success on each of those orange dice 62.5% of the time. So you are usually looking at only 2 hits out of this ability, and it's not uncommon to get 1. So some automatic damage or some automatic successes, that is, would go along a long way to make this ability feel more worthwhile in my mind. My honorable mention for the Hegemony goes to the Hetman. What on earth are you, dude? Do something. I don't understand why the discipline ability on the on-foot Hetman is worse when attached. If you look at the mounted Hetman, Hetwoman maybe, she has the same stress-reducing discipline command skill both when fighting solo and when attached, and for some reason the on-foot Hetman becomes a lot worse when you attach him. Also, yeah, getting a point of conquest and double orange willpower is cool, but really? No extra morale from your high command, no additional block or any defensive performance, no push modifier on the offense, just that one automatic success and a double holo special for additional success. That is so damn hard to get. I don't know what's the idea behind this one, so please back to the drawing board with the Hetman. Okay, let's talk Scions of Yaldabaoth next. I have quite some experience playing against Scions, and I have even played a few games with them, so I feel that there is something that I can give to this discussion. The problem with the Scions of Yaldabaoth at the moment is unfortunately that the so-called quote-unquote living flesh units seem to have been left behind by the new Risen units, and it's beginning to look like the Scions of Yaldabaoth are the dead units faction with some living support, rather than you being feasibly able to build dead flesh heavy, risen heavy, or living models heavy. Let's see if we can figure a way around this conundrum. First, let's talk about the basic human infantry of the Science of Yaldabaoth. I like the intact as a unit in and of themselves. I feel they are very flavorful. There are some really good and usable parts here, especially the Blades of Catrador command skill. But unfortunately, the problem isn't necessarily that the intact are bad in any way. It's just that there are better options out there. You are looking to fulfill the basic infantry role in most science lists these days with husks, and if you are looking for a more high impact, high value infantry unit, you are going to be reaching out for the liberated, for example, or at the moment echoes or the anointed. You're not going to be reaching for the intact, and I think that's really a shame. Another problem I feel with this unit is that they are not amazingly supported by the attachable characters that they have access to right now. There is a restriction among the scions what characters can join what types of units, and this leaves some characters who might be good with intact unable to join them, and some that shouldn't join them. I, for example, would love to see the progenitor sculptor inside the intact, but unfortunately, there is little point attaching them to the unit because they add an orange dice on the offense, and the intact are already packing the max 3 orange on their full power offensive dice. There has been a lot of talk online about how loyal until the end doesn't feel very powerful. It's a difficult passive skill to trigger, and you getting only a single rerolled dice per round also feels a bit lackluster. So let's see if we can find a way to help the intact out a bit, shall we? I would go at improving the intact quite conservatively. I would simply replace their red +3 orange attack with a triple red offensive profile. This would also force the frightened switch to be changed for something other than a hollow special, since the red dice don't carry any, but that's not that's not the main point here. While transferring to a triple red offensive dice set would only moderately increase the average damage of the unit, in reality it would actually be only a yellow dice's worth of extra damage, but there would be more times when the unit potentially spikes a 5 or maybe even 6 dice offensive roll, especially if they are able to leverage that loyal until the end to, for example, reroll that one red dice that didn't score a double, or that one red dice that scored a hollow success. This would also mean that attaching my beloved progenitor sculptor to the unit would carry more value, since you would actually be able to add their orange dice to the offensive dice set, and this would also make the Blades of Catrador more dangerous because you have a unit that's capable of inflicting more damage in spikes and spiking that higher damage roll when the enemy can only block with their hollow blocks would mean that the intact could from time to time hit way harder than their points cost would have you believe, and I feel that that's the niche for this unit. They aren't the fastest, they aren't the toughest, they don't hit the hardest, they don't have extremely high a conquest, but damn, when they get to hit above their weight class, they can do some real damage, and I think that's something to lean on going forward. In pretty much similar vein to the intact, I fear that the recently re-released marked don't actually possess the ability to compete with the other more expensive infantry options that the Scions have access to. Morale 1 is especially damning on this unit because it essentially means that you have to attach a morale increasing character to this unit in order to get your money's worth out of them, and at that point you could be asking the question, hey, well, why am I not taking the liberated instead and adding a character to them? Why am I spending the time and the effort to make the marked work when there are other options out there? Everything said about loyal until the end can be reaffirmed here, but the big thing is that the orichalcum implants is such a cool an ability, but I feel that it's not quite powerful enough as it now stands. As for the solution, I would be targeting the orichalcum implants for improvement. I don't see any problem giving the marked access to 2 or even 3 of the buffs that this passive skill provides them with. 2 of the 4 are mutually exclusive, since you can never have a progenitor sculptor and master uruk in the same list, so you would only at tops be getting 3 in any case, even if you were allowed to pick all 3. The units that you are picking for these abilities are also more geared towards supporting the living units of the faction. Well, maybe not necessarily Master Uruk, but the other ones more so, yes. So I feel that incentivizing bringing those models to support the marked would be a nice way to go about it. If you choose to invest the points in getting the marked, and you choose to invest the points in getting your tutors, your sculptors, your needles, then I don't think it would break the game if these guys would be able to benefit from all those abilities, or those buffs rather. Maybe it would be a good idea at that point to reduce the command tokens gained from the tutor to 1 in order to stop an endless flow of risen units taking advantage of this combination. But even so, I think this could be something cool, and we could see more marked on the field going forward. Not that we have not seen a lot of them so far, because the unit was just released in its current form, but you know what I mean. The third science model that I chose to target for some improvement was the breath. I feel that the problem with the breath is that while on paper she is a solid piece for giving additional tinge to your units and potentially splashing some out against the enemy, in practice she doesn't do any of those things innately. She has to activate in order to access those abilities, and with the Science current roster full of powerful units and characters and several activations worth of actions when using the fantastic virtuoso models, for example, I think it's rather hard to see a point for activating your breath even if you chose to bring her along. Also, in another faction, having a 15-point spellcaster simply for blocking enemy spells might be worthwhile, but with the Science heavy focus on magic users anyway. I don't think there is a need for breath even in that capacity at the moment. What would I change then? Well, I would grant the breath the ability to deal out tinge, quote unquote, passively without having to activate the model. Just generating tinge by standing there would probably be too powerful because the most powerful seeming science units are already fueled by tinge, so getting more free tinge on them would be a problem. But maybe if the breath gave you the option to add tinge at the beginning of the round for models slash units within certain smallish range by spending a command token, for example, then you would have a decision point to make for the science player, and at the end of the day a command token spent to splash out tinge at the beginning of the round would also be a command token not spent to bring back a risen unit. So there would be a trade-off there. As of right now, a breath isn't usually the most dangerous of models for your opponent either, because while she is capable of displacing herself around the battlefield with her offensive switches, and she can even create fog markers, I haven't had a big problem dealing with her the times I have faced her so far. So if she was able to passively splash out or via a command skill splash out tinge at the beginning of the round, it would mean that a late round breath darting forward towards the enemy's midst in an effort to apply tinge could be a threat to be reckoned with. But at the same time, if and when this adding of tinge would happen at the beginning of the round, then it would not instantly stress out the units involved, but rather they would have to pay the cost of accumulating tinge later during the game. So in a way, this would not also make a 15-point model too powerful. As for my dishonorable mention for the Science of Yaldabaoth, I had to go and pick Git Malu, in my mind the imperfect one. I highly encourage all of you to listen to the Touch of Tinge podcast, period. The guys there are doing an awesome job and I really enjoy listening to them. But for more on Gitmalu, I highly suggest you listen to their latest episode where they were talking about I think it's the March releases for Warcrow, the non-Mount Haven ones at least. And they had a lengthy discussion on what's wrong with Gitmalu's profile as is. Granted, we have not seen this model on the field, at least not too many time so far, but at the same time, just looking at this profile seems really quite something. My hunch is that this is an excellent 40 or 45-point model that for some weird reason only costs 25 points. There are numerous things that feel a bit disturbing when looking at this card. And for example, if I was asked what to do about this, exchanging all of the abilities presented here into command skills would not feel out of place if we are talking about a 25-point character. But go listen to A Touch of Tinge, they have a whole discussion on this model, and let's move on with our day. Next up, let's talk about the Syennan. And an important caveat before going forward. Unfortunately, I have very little experience playing against the Syennan, and I don't own any Syennan models outside the Adventures box, so I haven't played with Syennan ever either. But I feel that I have watched enough Syennan games and also heard enough of the discussion online and analyzed these profiles enough that I have something to put forward here. And if you choose to ignore my words because Krotnip doesn't know what he's talking about, well, that's par for the course of doing this anyway. So no harm, no foul. Let's start by addressing the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the Shadows of the U. The Shadows of the U is the first unit in Warcrow that I consider to be a bad idea on how they have been executed. This seems to be a unit that's way too powerful, way too good, and it's cannibalizing the rest of the faction because you basically have to include these guys, and to some extent often if you want to be competitive you want to be building around these guys also, and that isn't good for the health of the faction, not to mention the health of the nerves of the people playing against the Sienna. The problem I have with the Shadows of the U is that they are simply too good at everything. They are ambushers, so they are basically immune to damage until the enemy, that is the Syennan, decides to bring them in. They have great threat range. They aren't slowed by the rugged terrain, they see through trees, and they can make excellent use of the druid provided extra forest that the Syennan player gets to place every damn time. The shadows hit extremely hard. They not only can splash out a lot of successes and remove a lot of blocks, but they also have access to automatic wounds, so they can bypass the enemy's defense on a number of wounds entirely. If enemies have any anti-charge, anti-assault tech, that doesn't work against the shadows when they charge themselves, and they will be charging out of ambush pretty much all the time. And the enemy can't even leverage their switches against them, and that's really rough when you try to fend off these elven assassins. At the same time, the Shadows of the U don't just drop dead after they have landed the first blow. Enemy can't see them if they are next to a terrain piece and the enemy is trying to draw line of sight to them from beyond 7 strides. They have quite an amazing defense roll with some crazy switches on the defense. And in the combination that they are usually played, they get to ignore a bunch of wounds also. Because when you attach the dreaded Leo's Life to this unit, the shadows essentially, as long as they are near a forest or a numerous unit, ignore the first wound they would take every single activation, so it's really hard to chip them away with retaliatory attacks on defense, even if you can perform them without switches, remember. And since Leo's Life also enforces the vulnerable state upon the enemy when they attack or charge, I don't remember which one it is, but anyhow, you don't even get to push for that extra performance. As a 2-member unit that has an officer attached, the shadows essentially ignore the first casualty they suffer. It doesn't impair their performance at all, and that's just terrible. I know apples to oranges and all that, but good grief, how about you compare these to what the skin changers are doing for the exact same price? That's just crazy. Okay, what can we do then in order to bring the Shadows of the U a little bit closer to the ground? I would not be going overboard and dropping the nerf hammer on these guys so that no one will ever feel them again. I'd take away the Shadow's ability to be always great in every situation. I feel that this unit needs a definite weakness. It needs a thing that it can't do or it can't stand up against in order to provide more balanced a gaming experience when playing against the Shadows. As a Northern Tribes player, obviously my first thought was to remove the Shadow's ability to deny enemy switches, because this would mean that enemies with powerful defensive switches would be more likely to stand against the assault or charge of the Shadows of the U, and at the same time the Shadows would not be all that eager to engage units that can, for example, trade blocks for successes. The other solution, and maybe the one I would be more inclined towards, would be giving the Shadows of the U a special rule that makes it so that no character can actually join the unit. We have precedents of a skill like this from the Mord map in the pre-release, the Adventures release of the Science of Yaldabaoth, and I think it would also make sense from the point of view of the backstory. These are highly trained elite elven assassins. Having a character come along would surely ruin their carefully planned choreography and come in the way of get in the way of their excellent field craft that provides them these almost mythical level combat capabilities. This would also stop essentially the Shadows from leveraging their own amazing abilities combined with the amazing abilities that Leos Lyth is providing the unit, while at the same time Leos Lyth herself would not be nerfed. It would not be necessary to nerf her at all, rather she would just find her place attached to another unit, or maybe even fighting solo, because that's a cool option also. Well, the other two options, or the other two units that I wanted to discuss, are Syennan units that I would actually like to see buffed. So I'm not just here to hate the Syennan in all of their forms. The Grove Curtailers have been the poster children of cool but bad for the Syennan from pretty much the get-go. Many Syennan players have a unit, even if not two units of Grove Curtailers because of the release schedule, but I doubt that many of them see time on the gaming table as of right now. So we have an expensive scout unit that doesn't do enough for its value, and also they are competing against some amazing ambushers, some amazing scout units in the faction, and even some units that are starting from the deployment zone looking at you, Moss Hermit. So the Grove Curtailers unfortunately aren't doing so hot right now. So how would I go about improving the Grove Curtailers? For a brief time, when the first beta versions of the Corvosphere were being released, the Grove Curtailers had a profile card online with a hollow success to success switch on the offensive, and there was much rejoicing from the Syennan community. I felt a bit sad for the Grove Curtailers and sorry for the Syennan players that having such a mundane switch on this unit made them so happy and more eager to utilize this unit, considering how the orange and red dice that make up the majority of the Grove Curtailers' offensive output only have a single hollow success symbol on those dice available anyway. The yellow ones have two, yep, but still, it's not even that big of a deal. I would give back the Grove Curtailers their offensive switch. I was debating going for elite with them, but then again that would probably make their defensive role too good with the switch that they already have. But I would not make this offensive switch into a hollow success one, but rather I would make it into a hollow special one. And bear with me when I explain why. The yellow and the red the yellow dice have a single facing of a hollow special on them, and the red have none, yes. But the orange dice have two each. So This would mean that the Crow Curtailers would get effective 0.75 additional points of damage from the switch when on full power, and actually they would get increased performance out of it when they would drop down to less than half, because you would exchange the red dice that had no hollow specials into an orange one that has two. Also, this would improve the ability of the Crow Curtailers to get value out of their joint character, whose name I'm not going to try and remember. He'll be coming up on the next slide anyhow. But he's adding a blue dice to the attack roll of the Crow Curtailers, so that would not only help them defend themselves, but also they could use the two hollow specials from the blue dice to increase their offensive output. And if you're willing to pay 35 points for this unit and attach a 25-point character to them, all the power to you. I'm I'm going to give you that switch every day of the week. Go ham and don't throw some other types of elven nastiness at me. Speaking of helping out the Crow Curtailers, Neakkalden Fiara noticed the perfect elven pronunciation right there. I haven't seen Neakail played all that much. He feels like a cool character, and I really love his backstory. And I love the idea that while most of the Syennan elves recoil away from Tinge, there are those who are more resistant to it and even have a little bit more of a symbiotic relationship with it. And I think that this is something that the designers went for when designing Neakail and his pain tolerance ability, but unfortunately I don't feel that it translates all that well onto the gaming table, especially not on the attached version, because healing all the damage from a unit with two wound models means that you can be healing one or none at all, so that doesn't feel all that amazing. And also both the pain tolerance and especially the wind greaves have been a bit poorly worded. It's hard to decipher when they are usable and when not exactly. For the sake of allowing Neakail to provide more value and for ease of tracking, ease of use, I would simply change his pain tolerance ability to granting the Tinge Golem that we already see, for example, on the husks. That is, that a unit suffering wounds would then be able to use tinge that the unit has accumulated to essentially cancel those wounds until all the tinge was spent. This would give the unit a natural way of getting rid of the tinge that it's gaining through Neakail's passive ability, without having to actually sacrifice actions to do so, as is the case right now. This would also give Syennan access to a unit that isn't afraid of getting tinge on them. On the contrary, this would be a unit that would probably be the first to launch itself at closing out a rift in the feed rift, obviously, and also engaging enemies that are capable of inflicting tinge upon their enemies. This would make them a interesting counter against some of the strategies that the Scions are trying to leverage. But at the same time, the Syennan are working with the more unforgiving tinge roll table, where you take a point of stress if you have at least 1 point of tinge at the end of the round, and the effects get even more worse if you get more and more of it. So I feel that this would be a cool background oriented change that would give Neakail and the Crow Curtailers more time on the field. Also reword the wind graves so that you actually know when and how to make use of them. And my last honorable mention would be the Druid and their attackers. Sorry, it was Defenders of the Great Forest ability. I think it's a good idea to give the Syennan Elves a guaranteed access to a piece of forest terrain on the table. I don't think it's absolutely necessary because they have so many numerous units at the time being. But okay, let's say you want to keep this ability. Giving the Syennan Elves the ability to have a forest that they get to deploy right next to the opponent's deployment zone is a terrible idea. I really hate this. I really hate that there is a essentially parachuting zone next to my deployment zone that can facilitate all the ambushers of the elves simply dropping in, and I don't want to have to spend points and units in order to fulfill that forest with orcs so that no elves can come out of it. That's a stupid idea also. So I would most definitely remake the Defenders of the Great Forest into to include the restriction that the Syennan can only deploy this extra piece of forest terrain on their half of the table. Getting to place it on the opponent's half is just plain stupid. So sorry to be so blunt about this, but I really heavily feel that this is not okay. So I would really like to see this one changed also. And with that, I have now put forward my wishes, thoughts, and ideas to the universe, and we will see if any of them find their way to Corvuspelli. And regardless of whether they do, I still maintain that Warcrow is a truly amazing a miniature game, and balance-wise it is really great stuff. So I highly encourage you to go ahead and play as it is, and I'm so excited to see what Corvuspelli does next. This has been the logbook of a simple Lindworm traveler. Hope to see you again soon, fellow travelers. Goodbye for now.